Now, Cincinnati Connection, connecting you to your community.
Hey there, welcome back to another edition of Cincinnati Connection. I'm your host, Sharice Gibson. So the controversy continues as residents fight displacement when the FC Cincinnati Stadium is built in the West End. I read a really interesting article on Cincinnati.com, our partners over at the Cincinnati Enquirer. This is from Garry, who has been an advocate for the low-income and homeless residents of our community. That article asked the question, do the poor have a place in Cincinnati? Now, in the article, Garry suggests that ideas the city could do to enhance neighborhoods like the West End without completely ridding them of affordable housing. And we are not saying that that's what's happening here, but it certainly does add another viewpoint to this conversation. So we have Brian in studio with us, of course, to talk about a little bit more. You made some really interesting points here, Brian, because it seems like in this article, you're not exactly demonizing the fact that there are some enhancements that are happening in certain neighborhoods, investments rather, that are happening in certain neighborhoods, but you're maybe suggesting that there are ways that we have to learn to do that without displacing anyone and without exactly making someone who doesn't have the means to live in the neighborhoods after those enhancements are there.
Yes, development is like a knife, so it can be used for bad things or good things. Development in and itself is not a bad thing. My mother started the Community Urban Redevelopment Corporation movement in the country, and she wrote the laws to bring in the HUD funding into the cities, into the urban core, back in the 1960s.
Yeah.
So I grew up in Bond Hill, and she began fixing up homes in Bond Hill, but she didn't change the neighborhood in terms of socioeconomic.
Yeah,
so
the makeup of the community.
They didn't change the makeup, the complexion of the neighborhood or the economic status. So they fixed up the houses and they sold them affordably, basically. So that can be done. There's no reason that we can't have fair development. But what's unfair about development that we've seen in the city is like over the Rhine.
Yeah.
So over the Rhine was, just 20 years ago was 15,000, essentially African American, essentially lower income people who have now been wiped away and just displaced and forgotten about because no one tracked where people went. There was no plan for relocation. They just said, you got to get out, you got to go. So our city is has been doing that a lot over the past 100 years, making plans for development, but no plan for relocation. And that's just unfair.
But can we say that this is the same case in the West End? Because you have Jeff Birding, which, they just released a letter saying that they want to extend for people to live in those particular buildings. Who were saying that they had to be displaced. So you had about 2 buildings that apparently people said they had to be moved out of. And you use that as the case. Of course, the big kind of the visual, the person who's kind of the vision for this is Mary Page, 99 years old, living in one of those buildings in the West End on Wade Street. But can you say that's the case for FC Cincinnati? Because Jeff Birding has basically said, well, we're trying to see what we can do to help. So I feel like working with people like you gives them an opportunity to maybe sit down. I don't know if you guys have already had a seat at the table together to figure out what is it that we can do so that you could bring your stadium here, but without displacing residents and without making poor people have to leave this community they've lived in all their lives.
That's correct. It is a great opportunity, and I hope that we take that opportunity and that we don't try to turn it into Over the Rhine West or Over the Rhine 2.0, where people are just annihilated and wiped out of the community like ethnic cleansing. But it can be a beautiful new scenario and really a shining example for how to really do development properly and fairly so that people who are there can stay and new people can come. They can build all the luxury that they want, but they just can't displace anyone in the process.
So tell me this, what are your suggestions, and you gave some in this article, when it comes to situations that we're seeing right now? This is in real time. It's happening right now, and obviously city leaders have responded. They voted so that they held FCC to their standard of saying that we would not displace anyone. What do you suggest happens in this case?
Well, there's 2 or 3 things that could happen. One thing would be that if a developer, like in this case with there's 20 people between 2 buildings. If the developer is taking away affordable housing, then the developer has to create new affordable housing with no net loss. So if they've taken away or removed 20 units, then they need to create 20 more.
Okay.
That's one. The other one would be rent control. As an example, people are being priced out already. Rents are going up in the West End.
That's something I hear a lot in New York City.
Rent control, yeah, and it's just a fair means of increasing rent over time. It's not that you can't increase rent at all. It's just that you just can't price people out, you know, in that immediate fashion with really nothing to show for it. You know, they haven't improved the apartment or anything. It's just that the area has become more desirable so that they raise rents exponentially and people can no longer afford to be there.
Well, I mean, two amazing suggestions, I believe. You asked the question, do the poor have a place in Cincinnati? Do you believe they do?
I believe that they absolutely should have a place in Cincinnati. I believe that currently, thus far, our methods of development have not included the poor. Our methods of development are just to take over an area. So, and replace that area, typically it's in a African American and lower income area, and just replace all the existing traditional residents with upper income and people who are white. So that's not fair. And I think there is a basic fairness that we have to use as a guiding force for our development. So we just have to be fair in terms of economic status and in terms of race, because Cincinnati, you know, has had racial problems in the past, and I think that we can correct those. We've had LGBT problems in the past. Those have mainly been corrected.
Yeah.
And so let's correct our racial and our socioeconomic status or economic status can be made into a protected class. So right now we have race, nationality, gender, all these things are protected classes. If the economic income were a protected class, I don't think we would have as much of this problematic or unfair development that we're having.
So now that we have seen this letter come down, and we have that on fox19now.com saying that those who live, those maybe 20 people who could be displaced, they're on, I believe, is it Wade Street?
Wade and Central.
And Central Avenue. Those people who possibly could be displaced, they're allowed to stay inside of those buildings up until, what is it, the end of the month or maybe the end of next month. What happens now? They say they're trying to work to figure out a solution. Have they reached out to people like you? Have they reached out to leaders in the community to figure out how is it that we can make this work where we all are working together? Because what you don't want to see is one against the other. You obviously want to see something new happen in the neighborhood, but without replacing something that's already been there. So have they reached out to you? Have they reached out to people within the community to figure out, outside of city leaders, but community leaders, to figure out what we can do to fix this problem or make this work for us?
I would love to meet with Jeff Birding and the FC staff to try to make a common productive solution for this situation. Thus far, what's happened at this point is that the residents have retained legal aid as their counsel. So right now it's counsel to counsel, FC's counsel and our counsel speaking with each other. But we have demands or requests, you know, to remain in the West End, and specifically in this case, we made a compromise solution where we said, okay, you can take 421 Wade Street and place all the people from there in a newly remodeled 1559 Central Avenue.
Okay.
So that's been our solution at this point, or what we've offered as a compromise, so that people aren't displaced out of the West End, and that their current lodgings are, you know, renovated, because they need renovation.
Yeah, because they need upgrades. And a lot of this also is on, they're all renting those buildings, right? So a lot of this is also on the owners of the buildings, but FC has also bought that, right?
Yeah, strangely in this situation, FC didn't just buy the buildings, but they bought the LLC that owned the buildings.
Okay.
So that, you know, it's technically owned by the same owner, so to speak, but it's really owned by FC in this situation.
All right. Well, Brian, thank you so much for joining us. Of course, we're going to continue this conversation right here on Cincinnati Connection. This is far from being over. Thank you so much again for being with us.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.